Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming back and watching the Tech Tips and Speed Tips by Bob and Chad. We're glad to be here again tonight. Ready for any questions? My weekend was pretty interesting. We actually ended up going to the races at Marshalltown. Had 3 days of racing there. The racing was extremely good. I was the racetrack. By the time the features came around, the racetrack was wide and it had a high side, a middle side, it had a bottom side. I was very pleased that Otobi Cruz and the guys at Marshalltown Speedway did an outstanding job all 3 nights. And Isaac Malakote got to debut the new BHE GRT 2021 with the new front end on it. That went pretty well. I have to kind of remind myself from time to time that he's only a 14-year-old kid and knee-high to a grasshopper. So, he's not probably as aggressive yet, but when he got in open space, he was not scared of the car, and the car was real good. I was very pleased. Did find out that the new car looks like it's going to have to run softer front suspension, but that's okay. Well, we made those changes, and the car got really came around a whole lot better. He ended up drawing front row for a heat race and won his heat race by a straightaway. And then I think it was Friday night. He didn't qualify in heat race. He was the first one out of the top four, I think. So he started front row in his B and ended up winning the B by basically a half a lap. I mean, the car was going pretty good. So he did a good job. The racing itself, man, Saturday night, I tell you what, Ethan Dotson was the man. He didn't qualify very good in his heat race, and he started quite a ways back. I think he had to run a B. I think he started 24th or 23rd or something like that, and ran right up to third. His car was probably the one that was passing the most cars. Caden Carter ended up winning the race. He started a little closer to the front, and he got the lead probably, I would say, lap 5 or so. And he, didn't run away and hide with it, but he was a good job. And then Jeff Ike won. I think he won on Friday night. He did a great job. Ethan Dotson got second Friday night. So great field of cars. A lot of cars from Wisconsin. A lot of cars from all over. That one guy was there from Oregon that's been out here pretty much most of the summer. So it was a great field. It was very interesting. And the weather was good, totally dry. Did get a little on the chilly side by the end of the night, but it was pretty good. How about your weekend, Chad?
Well, I took the weekend off after the long week in Boone there, and actually went to Les Dillman's dad's, Elmer Dillman's museum in Fountain City there up on the hill. They got a museum. He's got, I think, the largest pedal car collection in the world, and he's got a bunch of old cars and a bunch of old racing stuff and toys, and they own a salvage yard, so there's 8,000 cars on the property and wrecked cars, and so it was pretty neat. I took the boys up there and tried to show them a little bit of history, and there was an old race car there that had wood in the seat to shrink it down to the size of the human that was sitting in the seat. And the boys, they were like, Dad, did somebody actually sit in there? And it was and Rick Dolman, who was there working, he asked the boys if they seen that car, and yeah, they thought that was pretty crazy that they used wood to shrink the seat down to his size, and they welded some extensions on the pedals, and so it was a neat day hanging out with the boys, a little throwback tour there, and show them what it used to be. And there was a pretty cool spindle there that my kids were blown away. They just took a piece of round and cut the spindle apart and made it taller and changed the roll center. That's the way they did it back then. But it takes me back too to appreciate, when I first started working on the parts, and there was a lot of, mostly everything was homemade. A lot of scrapyard stuff, a lot of thrown together visions, and that's it's cool to go back and see that old stuff, and maybe trip a little memory there, and get an idea on something that they were doing back then. One of the cars had a pretty cool idea. It had a pump jack in there that they had rigged to the left rear leaf spring on it.
Sure.
So,
Yep.
adjustable suspension throughout the night. So it was a fun weekend to go and check that out. If anybody's interested, that's the Elmer's Auto and Toy Museum in Fountain City. That is definitely worth a trip over there to check out the museum. It's a very cool thing, neat family. So that's what I did.
Well, I'll have to check that out sometime. That sounds pretty interesting. And I know when I get to looking at some of the old stuff and back in the day, like, 1980, 79, 80, 81, back in the day, we never thought about weight. I mean, it was never an issue. It was more about if we thought an eighth of an inch of steel would work, then we should put a quarter in it to make sure.
Yeah.
And I look at some of that stuff and I'm thinking, God, how do we even do that? But back then we didn't have the technology, and we didn't have the resources that we have today to be able to help that. Gentleman from Wisconsin, a sport mod racer, I don't remember his name. He told me, but I actually forgot. Came up to me. I was sitting on the golf cart waiting for the feature to start. He came over, and man, he was just thanking me and wanted to make sure I told you how much we had helped his race program. Last year, he only made two features the year before, and this year he made every feature at the racetrack that he was running at. And he was excited. He says, watching your show, he said, has definitely turned my program around. And so I kind of had to chuckle about that. And I thought, well, that was pretty nice. I was glad. I said, well, I appreciate you coming and letting us know. That's pretty cool. Well, Chad, we got a question for you. Dan Patch wants to know, Chad, why when figuring the spring table on the right front with a drop cup, you use the bearing at the end of the weight jack bolt? On the left rear with the slider, you use the Heim joint. Then on the right rear spring on top of the axle, it is the top of the spring.
So a little confusing, but it's where it attaches to the chassis. So whatever is holding the spring device, where it attaches to the frame itself. The frame is the rigid component, and that's what either induces roll or resists roll is the frame. So wherever that spring device, whether it's the spring separate or the coilover aspect, wherever that's hooked to the frame is the spring table. So I know it's kind of confusing to think about it, but that's why when it's not a coilover, it's the bearing or where the screw jack places in the spring cup, and on a coilover, it's where the Heim or the shock bolts to the chassis. So it's about where it connects to the car, and how it connects to the car is the difference there. So.
Well, it was very interesting because today my Austin came up to me with a technical question that he had a customer had asked him, and this particular customer has one of our new 2020 sport mods, and his car, he's been kind of fighting a little bit of a tight condition, and of course after what I learned with Isaac's car this weekend, he just needs to soften the right front spring. But anyway, back to the original story, he says, well, what about if I put instead of the 13-inch 225 right rear spring, what if I put an 11-inch 300 in there? And I told Austin, I said, well, you tell him if he thinks he's tight now, go ahead and make that change. Drop that spring table down 2 inches on that right rear, put a super stiff spring in it, and that thing's going to stick to right rear like glue. So it's, a lot of people don't think that stuff makes a big difference. But, it's just like when you made the cups, the rear cups, where they actually ended up being about a 1-inch drop compared to the standard cup. That was just a perfect situation in our situation because, it kind of moved that down inside the spring a little bit, and I thought that worked pretty well.
Yeah.
Does running an aggressive left rear brake pad tighten the car on entry or loosen it? An aggressive left rear pad will actually free the car up on corner entry because you're stopping the left rear faster. And so, of course, it's going to not roll as much. I mean, I don't think it's going to have that big of an effect on the roll, but it's going to be a little bit. But the big thing is with that aggressive pad, you're stopping the left rear, so you're forcing the car over on the right front. And so, in my opinion, I think, and we struggled a little bit with that with Jake McBurney's car this weekend. His car was set up really well for Boone, and of course, people don't understand that Boone's kind of almost its own separate entity. I mean, what you do at Boone doesn't necessarily always relate to everywhere else, just because of the wood chips and just how they prepare the racetrack and things like that. But anyway, the moral to that story was the fact that the car was much freer, and we ended up actually having to put new brake pads in it because it had too much. The brake pads were wore out, and that caused our freeness problem to the point where we ended up having to put some more J-bar in it. We had to do some trickery with some shocks and some stuff like that. And he got pretty good by, I kind of wished we could have we raced Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and I almost wished they would have had a Sunday, because by the time we got everything done on the car where it needed to be for that slick racetrack, we were in pretty good shape. We just needed another night on it. Chad, what effect does moving the links up or down on the Weir's birdcage do? 4-link.
Well, there's a lot of different scenarios there. You would probably have to tell us one or the other, but biggest thing, whenever the farther away you get the arms from the center line of the axle, the slower the cage rotates, the closer the faster it rotates. So, it can do various things to speed that cage up, to create more index, to create more roll steer. The bottom rods generally are your steer, and the top rods are generally your drive angle and your index. But there's a ton of different changes you can do there. One of the most popular 2 or 3, I would say, would be the left upper rod down on the cage to speed the cage up. It makes the car turn on entry, gives it traction off. Right bottom rod up on the bottom will make the car free in, tight off. There's tons of different scenarios there, but the biggest thing is to start 4.5 up, 4.5 down, keep it simple, and then just tune one at a time based on what you're feeling there. So, Bob, you got anything to add to that?
No, I think you hit everything and I really stress the fact what Chad said is start with it 4.5, 4.5. So that's a 9-inch split. Start there before you decide to go make changes, because, and keep in mind, whatever change you do on the cage is going to have double the effect of if you were to, half an inch on the cage is equal to an inch on the frame of movement. So you have to, understand that. But no, you hit it on the head. It was excellent. Fred says hello. How's things in California, Fred? Brian's got a question. What's the advantage or disadvantage of running a left rear brake floater? I see some cars not running them now. I'll let you talk about that, Chad.
Well, I don't know if they're not running a brake floater, or they're not running the arm and they're clamped to the cage, or if they're just clamped to the axle tube. So, a lot of the lift arm cars will. I don't know if that's what kind of car it is there, but
that's actually an IMCA car that Brian's got.
IMCA car. I would say that you should be on I feel on a pull bar car. Either the brake floater or clamped to the cage. The difference is that the floater is a little less effective than clamped to the cage. So short tracks, I would, think about being on the cage. Big tracks, I would be on a brake floater arm. You can tune accordingly, more angle, less angle in your brake floater rod. The thing about putting on the cage is if you're a heavy braker, you can sometimes get the car on the right front too hard and just push across the middle. So it's it's more effective than the brake floater rod. But I mean, that's basically the gist of it.
Yeah, I think that's a very good explanation. I've noticed, some guys, certain racetracks running the cage locked up, big short or a big racetrack that's got a lot of momentum, that maybe makes the car work a little better. It's not, I don't know actually what I could say about it, but it seems like the car works better. The shorter stuff, I think definitely a brake floater is better, because with a brake floater, it doesn't upset the car as much as what it can if you really get on the binders and on a short racetrack with it on the cage. And anytime you put something on the cage, when you apply the brakes, now you're restricting movement to the cage too. So you have to remember that. Dan's got a question, or a comment, I guess. I'd like to thank you guys for helping this 25-year-old pavement racer transition to a UMP modified. This weekend I scored my first podium and only my 8th start in a dirt car that my pavement friends and I are learning to set up as we go. Well, and Dan, in a sense, we're starting to see more pavement-related racing in dirt now, probably just in the last couple of years. So I think you hit the right time of the to move into a modified, because boy, there's a lot of similarities the way we run some of the new modified stuff to running a pavement car. So, but yeah, keep your questions coming. If there's anything else that we can think of or we talk about, we are going to probably skip a couple weeks here. I think we're going to probably be back the first of October. Actually, I think I looked it up that it would be like the 5th of October or something like that.
I can't be here.
What?
I'm going to be in Washington, D.C. that day.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about that, Chad. Why are you going to be in Washington, D.C., and who are you going to get to visit with?
Well, the Wyatt Bicycle Company that I'm part owner of, and Weir's Machine manufactures the frames. And are you getting a lot of miles on yours, by the way?
Not a lot. I'm hoping that I finally get to now here pretty soon.
Anyway,
I got a bucket list of stuff to do when I'm not going to the racetrack.
Yeah. So October 5th, the President of the United States has Made in the USA Day, where they bring a manufacturer from all 50 states to the White House for Made in the USA Day. And the Wyatt Bicycle Company got picked for the state of Wisconsin. So me and the other owner, Wyatt, are going to D.C. to set up on the south lawn of the White House with a couple of bicycles, a couple of frames made right here in Bangor, Wisconsin. So it's going to be a very, very overwhelming trip for me. A little small manufacturing company in Bangor, Wisconsin, to get recognized like that is going to be pretty wild. So we're looking forward to it. It's going to be exciting. Hopefully we can get in and out of there without any protesting and all the other garbage that's going on in the world. So a little nervous about some of that, but anytime you get the opportunity to go there, it's overwhelming, and it's going to be crazy. So we're really excited to represent the state of Wisconsin and small manufacturing, and I don't know what to expect. It's going to be crazy. So,
well, that's pretty exciting. I mean, that's a huge honor, being able to get to do something like that. I'm very happy for you, and maybe we need to plan on Wednesday the 7th then, so we can hear all about this.
Yeah, don't make it Tuesday. We might do some road tripping on the way home and stop. We're gonna hit a couple bike dealers on the way out there. We've had some requests for dealerships on the East Coast, so we're gonna make a trip out of it. We might stop at a few different Weir's Machine dealers on the way home too. So if you are planning a show that week, Wednesday would be best, because we might not be home at Tuesday. So, but it's gonna be pretty cool.
Well, let's just plan on it then for Wednesday, October 7th. So everybody, Wednesday, October 7th, and we'll make sure and remind everybody in plenty of time. Yeah. And hopefully Chad will have a bunch of Facebook posts that we can share and that'll be exciting. I'm excited for you. That's just a huge honor.
Yeah, it's going to be. Boy, I'm easily nervous, so I don't know how I'm going to handle that situation. But
You'll be fine.
that's what
You
you always
still
tell
remember, he's just a regular guy with a title.
me, right? Yeah, a big one, like the leader
Yeah,
of the free world. Big one.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's exciting. We're pumped. I'm trying to get Carl Fredrickson from Speedway Illustrated. I think he's going to get a press pass, so he's going to come and cover the whole deal, and that's going to be pretty exciting to have him with us and document it, and certainly a once in a lifetime experience, especially for just a kid from Wisconsin. So
yeah. No, that's pretty exciting. Brenton has talks about. I've heard all different theories on tire temperature. Does more heat in one of the rear tires mean it has more or less traction than the other? Well, Brenton, it kind of depends. If you're running low air pressure will cause heat. I was actually sitting on my golf cart in staging the other night, and one of our customers pulled it up, and I actually thought he had a flat left rear. So I went over and I said, how many pounds do you run in your left rear? And he told me, he says, 8. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, that's the reason why it looks like you got a flat tire. No big deal. Now, in my opinion, that's too low. What's going to happen in that situation, I think it can cause a lot of tire flex. And what the Hoosier, who am I thinking of? The Hoosier rep.
Shannon.
Oh, yeah, Shannon. Shannon Rush was telling me that that's one of the worst things a guy can do with this type of tire. The way it's made is have a lot of sidewall flex. It's not like a drag race tire. But anyway, that can be confusing there if you start with too much tire temperature, or too much air pressure or too low air pressure. If the air pressures are set correct, then the tire that has the more heat is the tire that's actually sliding or spinning, because sliding and spinning will create heat if the air pressures are set correctly. So in my opinion, it's by far, it's the old wise tale, feed the heat. If your right rear is spinning, you need to put some traction in the right rear to make the car, because it's actually just out there sliding and spinning rather than hooking up to the racetrack. Because a tire that's actually hooked up good with correct air pressure will not run super hot. It'll be in that 140 degrees, 130 degree range, so it won't be too bad. Pros and cons of chaining down the right rear. How much is too much? I'm really not a huge fan of chaining down the right rear unless you know for a fact that the racetrack is 100% smooth. Like if you'd have been at Marshalltown Speedway this weekend, that would have probably been one of the first racetracks I've been to this year that I would say putting some chain in the right rear could have been an advantage, because when you put chain in the right rear, it keeps the right rear from gaining too much angle and will make the left rear try to work a little harder. But once again, if and what's too much, I always go to the point where I like to chain it so that the spring is just free in there, and then a quarter of an inch, half an inch is a pretty big adjustment on that situation. So I wouldn't go much over that. And if the racetrack is rough, I'd run the chain loose, because the car is going to be radical. I have seen brake floaters on the right side. What is the advantage or disadvantage to that? Well, it depends. Certain drivers can actually run that and do okay with it. But when you put a brake floater on the right rear, now every time you get on the brakes and it's on a floater, it's going to instantly put side bite in that right rear tire. So now say, for example, you get on the brakes a little bit different than what you did the lap before, the car's going to be a little different. Most of the guys, because you'll actually watch them, most of those guys that run a brake floater on the right rear, they drive that thing all the way into the center, stab the brakes, and pivot it quickly and turn and go off. Now, if you're in traffic, that can be difficult. And so I would be nervous about that. You don't, it goes in spurts, but I don't see a lot of right rear stuff anymore. A couple years ago, that was kind of a fad for a little bit. What do you see it, Chad? I mean, you know what you're selling.
There ain't very many people running it. There's only a select few that like it and can drive that way for sure.
And it definitely would be something for a super smooth, slick racetrack. And you'd have to really be a good trail breaker to make that work. Okay. I've been having a little trouble getting on the right front. Spring is a 550, shock is a 3 compression, and an 8 extension. Left front spring is a 600. Think I should drop the rate of my right front to a 500 and hoping to tighten entry just a little bit. Actually, Greg, I would put the 550 in the left front and put a 500 in the right front and drop the whole front end down, because when you take spring out of the left front, that's also going to help the front end get down, which in turn will actually help the car get on the right front. Definitely, I would agree with going to a 500. The cars today and the suspensions that we're running, 550 is about the stiffest you would ever see, and anymore it's just not. It softer seems to be better. It's not uncommon with the modifieds to be a 450 even, and there's even some people that run a 400. Mark says, happy birthday to Toby. Well, Toby, I know you're probably not listening, but happy birthday to you too. IMCA stock car, can you talk about dry slick bike numbers and the adjustment you would make to help with drive without possibly giving up too much side bite? The biggest thing with the stock cars is, of course, they will allow you two different, or most of the chassis builders have two different sets of holes where you can actually bring the right rear forward or bring the left rear backward. So what I would do is, having more bite on the left rear, and when I say more bite, I don't think you'd ever need to be anything over 150 pounds, but something in that neighborhood. But when you do put more bite in it, it's going to free the car up getting in, so you're going to have to do something like that to try to help the car still come up off the corner straight, and that will help quite a bit too. I run the panhard bar behind the housing. What effect does it running a longer bar or a shorter bar? Well, it's like everything, Brian. A shorter bar is going to react quicker. Longer bar is going to take a little bit longer. In the IMCA world, or in some of the sanctioning bodies that have the rules, they give you a specific measurement, like a 23-inch bar. And if the rule is a 23-inch bar, I wouldn't run anything longer than that. Most of the time, the guys that are running the J bars with the in front are running a 21-inch center to center measurement, but 19 to 21 inches. So I like the shorter bar because I think what it does, instead of trying to roll the car over on just the right rear and hooking the right rear, it seems to help the car traction both tires. Anytime you get the pivot point on the rear end closer to the center, it's going to have the same effect on both tires rather than just rolling on the right rear. The long one is slower, but you put more force on the right rear, and in a long race it can actually cause a heat situation, overworking that right rear tire. What's the best way to get a hold of a very marbly dry surface? We actually had that a little bit on Thursday night, and like the guys that I worked with, we went softer shocks. We put our softer compression shocks on, put a little bit more panhard bar or J bar in the car, and we tied the front end down just a little bit more so that we tried to force the right sides to be in the dirt, but yeah, it's definitely tough, and the guys that have their stuff really good on a super smooth slick racetrack tend to really struggle when it's uh, dirty. Tim Ward, his car is always super fast at Marshalltown, and that night that it was really dirty, he really struggled on that just because of the setup that he had in that particular heat race. What pros and cons on a progressive spring, especially on the left rear? Well, anytime you have something that's progressive, it all depends on the movement that you get on how it actually loads that spring. I'm not super sure it would be the answer on a left rear. I would rather run a softer left rear and put more load in it because then it would be more consistent. I know there's some cars that are running some of those springs that are a little progressive on the right side. I think the heavier car, like the stock car, I think that works very, very well. On the modified, I think that's a driver dependent deal. Some drivers tried it, didn't like it because it was a little inconsistent, and some guys swear by it. It just all depends on the surface that you're running on. What's the best way to align the rear end side to side in the car for a sport mod? Well, Frank, what I actually do, we have an actual measurement that we use from the where the J-bar mounts on them, because with our sport mods, they still have the J-bar mount in the car as far as the frame mount. And so we measure to the center of the drive shaft into there. But I recommend taking and string lining your left side tires. Like pavement stuff, we always used to string line the right side tires. With the dirt, I like string lining so that my left front tracks the left rear tracks the left front perfectly square. That usually puts your right rear inside a little bit. It makes the car have a little bit more side bite. And if you have that left rear in line with the left front, it seems to drive the car off the corner a little bit straighter. When you put the left rear inside the left front, it tends to think that you're supposed to turn. And so the car sometimes can be a little bit freer in the middle of the corner. And if the car is a little tight, that's what you can do. But if you're running an IMCA sport mod, the only real rim change you can make is from a 3 to a 4. And these cars are too fast, in my opinion, to run a 4-inch offset. Makes the car just too narrow. And I don't like the stability that the 4-inch offset brings. Jace says left front 9-inch split on the 4-bar on a bird cage is standard setup. What would the split be on the frame? Bottom 4-bar to top 4-bar, difference from side to side. That's actually a great question.
I've never actually measured it that way.
I've never either, to be honest with you.
I have the
angles.
I have the software, the really cool software for that you have to put those measurements in, but I haven't measured a car in so long. I don't even know what that number would be. I'd have to go and check my computer, but most of the time we go off the 4.5 up, 4.5 down on the cage on the rear end, and then we go 4 to 6 up on the left bottom and 24 to 26 on the left top rod, and right side's about 14 to 16 on the top and 0 to 3 on the bottom. So wherever that ends up on your car would be a good place to measure and start, but I don't know the actual numbers of that. And if you don't, then that
I actually have not measured that. I go by angles, and I use the same angle numbers that you just said right there. I've never actually thought to measure that split.
I
But
measured it
since I
going
have the
off.
simulator all set up with a 4-link on it, I can measure that tomorrow.
Yeah.
That'll be a good question. Todd wants to know, will more right rear lower bar angle promote more forward bite? Yes, it will. When you take a little angle out of that right side lower, what it does, it tightens the car up getting in, so it actually will put a little bit of side bite in the car. And when you go to traction off, it takes a little bit of steer off the car. So running more split in those two, the more split in the front on the frame definitely helps the car traction up off the corner. A lot of times it's a kind of a sensitive adjustment. You can drop it like one hole on the frame, and we just use a number. Like on our cars, standard is hole number 4, and dry slick is hole number 3 on the frame. And what the degree difference is it's probably, when we go to hole number 3, it's probably only 1 degree. And in hole number 4, it's probably about 3.5 to 4 degrees. Now, I bet it's probably only about 3 degrees. Been struggling to get off the corner on dry slick. Been putting 40 pounds of bite without the driver. If I put, say, 100 pounds of bite in the car, should I raise the right trailing arm to 10 to 12 degrees angle to free the car up through the corner? If I do, will this give me better drive off? Northern Sport Mod. Actually, if you put more bite in the car to get you off the corner, you would not want to put more angle in your right side, because you're actually it's not going to tighten. When you put more bite in the car, it's actually going to free the car up getting into the corner. So if you added angle to it, it would actually put more roll steer in it. It would make the car actually freer yet getting off the corner. What I would probably do, and that's kind of why we use all of the Weir's panhard plates, because with that serrated, you can actually move it one click. And that's kind of what we actually did the other night on Jake McBurney's modified. All the adjustments that we made, then we just went one click on the panhard bar down, because we tried to do some other things to increase the bite, and knowing that we were increasing traction to the left rear, I was afraid we were going to lose side bite, and so we dropped the panhard bar on the rear end one click. So I would not increase the angle on the right lower bar. I would probably increase the angle on the panhard bar. Downward on the frame will give more drive off. Yep, I would agree with that. On a pro stock, downward on the frame. Oh, yeah. Now, it depends on your rules. And I agree with you, Todd, on something that you're allowed to have multiple holes, like the Pennsylvania pro stocks and stuff like that, where you can have more holes on the frame. Like in the stock car stuff out here in Iowa, we have to use all the OEM locations on the frame. So the only thing we can actually do is change it on the rear end. So what we would actually do is raise it up on the rear end one hole in a situation like that. Okay. Oh, yeah. Some other things I wanted to kind of mention tonight, now that we're a little over halfway through the show and we've got most everybody logged on. Make sure you keep us updated on your season. Like the Race Tech info page, we want to know how you did. All of you guys that have tuned into the channel here, and you guys that have come to the schools and bought some of the DVDs or bought the classes online or the Knowledge Center. Make sure you keep us informed on the Race Tech Info Facebook page. So Amy runs that and Garrett runs that, so that way they can keep keep up with what everybody's doing and give you a little plug if things have went well, and if they haven't went well, hopefully we can still help you. Then the other thing is all of you who had came to the classes, whether it was in Iowa here or whether it was in Pennsylvania, our class giveaway, the RTI class where we pick out a winner, we basically put all your names in a hat for the features that you've won, and we pick out one guy that's going to get a free class next year. So that ends November 1st. So let's not wait till October 31st to run them in here. Let's try to get that stuff in. It's to your advantage that you do that. The Racetech Info Schools, everything is updated on the website with the exception of the Pennsylvania school. And we've had many people ask how we're going to do it. And to be honest with you, I don't know completely sure how we're going to do everything. I'm fairly confident in the classes that we'll have here at our location that we'll have control, and we can take temperatures, and there's some things that we can do to make sure and keep everybody safe. We can make sure everything's sanitized every night, and we can do a good job with that. The Pennsylvania school, I'm not sure. We kind of got to wait this COVID thing out a little bit more and see kind of where that's all going to go. You Pennsylvania guys and Ohio guys and Michigan guys that came to that school, we definitely want to come back to that area. We're just kind of in a holding pattern to release a date. The date generally will be the first weekend in March, but all the other classes are online. And what we might end up having to do, depending on how this COVID thing goes, we might have to restrict the class size. In the past, we've tried to keep it to 65. We might end up having to go down to 40 or something like that. So if you are thinking about one of the classes, definitely I'd highly recommend you get your class logged in and get locked into a class. And if for some reason something happens where we have to cancel the class because of any of this thing, you'll be refunded the money. So it's not like you have to worry about that part of it. But anyway, wanted to talk about that. We still have the online classes, and the 3-link class is January 15th and 16th. The 4-link class is February 5th and 6th. Our stock car class, and we will have Paul Berger, and I'm pretty sure I didn't get a chance to talk to Kelly Shyrock this weekend because he was pretty busy with his customers at the racetrack. But the stock car class will be February 26th and 27th. So same general weekend as what had been in the past, and all that information is online at the Racetech Info class. Mark commented on that he runs the Weir's panhard bar bracket. I will lower the panhard bar then. I think that's a great choice, Mark. Keep in mind, one click will make the difference. Don't overdo it. Otherwise, you'll be doing wheelies down the straightaway. If you get too much panhard bar angle in it, and that was one of the things that I had a customer today said, what causes my car to wheelie going down the straightaway? Well, one of the things, believe it or not, is too much panhard bar angle. Having the panhard bar too low on the rear end hooks that right rear so hard, and you have to understand now you've got this angle, and of course this is the frame and this is the rear end. Well, if we point that higher up at the frame, what's it going to do? It's going to try to lift that left rear. Well, it can't lift the left rear. So in turn, it's going to take the left side up and try to load that right rear. So if you do have a situation like that, it's very possible you might have too much panhard bar angle in the car. And I see that a lot. What is the maximum caster split? Or what does more caster split do? Well, caster, that's one of the things that, depending on what spindles you're running, you can actually put more caster or more caster split in the car, and that'll help the car turn getting into the corner. Now, what I have done when I think that I need to do more caster split, I usually decrease the left side rather than increasing the right side. And the reason I do that is because if you get too much caster on the right front, you create this jacking effect. So when you go in, and you hit the brakes, it tries to lift the right front, and now the right front's trying to teeter-totter between the right front and the left rear if you get too much caster, because when you get on the brakes, it's trying to, the anti-dive in the car is going to make the car try to hold itself up. So more caster split helps the car turn getting in. If you're running Pinto spindles, I've seen guys run. Well, I've seen guys run unbearable amount. I've never run anything more than 5. The 3-piece spindles that do not have the inclination that the Pinto spindles, we've run as much as 6 to 7. 7's a little excessive. We've got the new 2021 modified or the sport mod that Isaac ran this weekend. We actually have 3 degrees in the left front and 6 degrees in the right front. The other thing that caster does is it does give the steering a little bit more feel. So say, for example, if you've got a driver that's less experienced or whatever, a little bit more caster can kind of sometimes help him get more feel of the front end. That's one of the things that it does. What do you think about running the bars ahead of the rear end center line on a sport mod? When you do that, and I'm not saying that doesn't work, because I have seen it work. I don't like running the left front a bunch further ahead and not having the right. I just assume if I move the left front ahead or the left rear ahead, I would probably move the right rear ahead also. I don't like the 2 different angles on the rear end, because then they react at different times. You will find if you do move the trailing arms further ahead of the rear end, you will have to increase your spring rate, because the car doesn't have the ability to hold itself up when you have that bar, like say in the center line. When you go to traction up and the rear end tries to pivot forward, it's lifting, where when you move it in front of the housing, it's not going to lift as much, and the reaction is going to be different. What do you think about running? I already answered that one, Jeff. What's the advantage does the AFCO Chevelle clip have? Notice they are narrow. Well, the Chevelle clip, the AFCO one's not any more narrow than the actual Chevelle clip, because it was made off of an original Chevelle clip. So it's identical in width. It's not any narrower. The advantage to the Chevelle clip from a builder standpoint is you get to work with new metal. You don't have to work with rusty old stuff that's half rusted out. I remember back in the day, some of the stubs we'd get in there, by the time you patched them and everything, you had so much time involved in building the stub that it was just labor intensive. The new AFCO clip assembles very well. What it used to take us 6 to 7 hours to build a stock clip from an OEM car, we can build an AFCO clip in about 3 hours, because it's just made so well. Then the other thing is, from a crash standpoint, you can buy left sides and right sides, and you can buy right frame rails if you need to. Those pieces are available, now from a parts house, and that makes another thing that makes your job a lot easier if you're trying to fix the car yourself, or if we're fixing the car, it's a lot less labor involved. How about running a straight panhard bar on a 4-bar clamped up? The disadvantage to running William, I'm not 100% sure. There's a couple scenarios here. If you're talking about a straight panhard bar, then you'd be talking about mounting to the left side of the drive shaft and going to the frame, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to clear the pinion. If you were to mount it behind the housing, it would be so far back because of the rear end cover that it would be a royal pain to be able to do the gears. But what they do differently to the car, because that's really what you're asking me, is when you're mounted in front of the housing and the frame rolls up, your left rear rolls up, the pinion wraps up too. So all of a sudden now, say your panhard bar is moving up 4 inches or 3 inches on the frame, it's probably moving up maybe 2 inches on the rear end or an inch and a half, whatever. If you're mounted behind the housing, the frame moves up, but when you traction up, the panhard bar goes down and creates more angle. And so that can kind of create this deal, and you'll really notice it a lot that if you go into the corner, when you lift, if you don't trail brake very good and you let the left rear drop, those cars will get immediately loose getting into the corner because all the angle that you had in it just left. So the big thing is in front, you don't lose as much angle gain, where in the back you have a lot of angle gain because it's actually trying to tighten the car up the more the rear end torques up. I've experienced when you run a much caster split, when you encounter steer, it adds crossweight. That is very true. It definitely does. If you scale the car, whatever crossweight is jacking the front wheels up to the right, like counter steering, set back on the scales, and crossweight goes up. Too much caster split causes inconsistency. Harvey, that's a great way to put that. I appreciate your comment. That's the jacking effect that we were talking about. But thanks for ad-libbing that. I appreciate that. Justin wants to know, how long do the pucks typically last in your 7-puck closed bar, Chad?
We like to go 20 to 25 races, but we've had guys go 60 nights, so it's kind of up to you. Open motors tend to abuse the pucks a lot more than the crate motors, so it depends on what sanctioning body, what engine combination, IMCA mod, inch and a quarter travel. I'd say at least 25 nights before you want to work on that pull bar. But I would take it apart and clean it, every 5-6 nights. That's the downside of the sleeve styles is, you got to take them apart, clean them, re-grease them, and keep them fresh.
And that's the thing. If you do the maintenance like Chad just said, you'll get more life out of those biscuits. What kills those biscuits is when they get all full of dirt. And the way that biscuit's set to make, it's supposed to compress and then expand. Well, if it's full of dirt, it can't do all of those things. So anyway, that's just one of those situations where Chad hit it on the nail. The life is very good out of that pull bar. You just have to keep it clean. Now, I remember not this Super Nationals, but last year's Super Nationals. I was in the Weirs trailer and Chad got this pull bar and started to pull it apart, and it was so full of dirt he could hardly open the thing up because it was so full of dirt. And when he finally got it apart, it was caked with mud and debris, and I mean, it was unbelievable. I don't know how that thing could actually work. But so I watched Chad actually rebuild it, and I actually think we have that on one of our free videos somewhere, a video somewhere. Oh, it's on the Race Knowledge Center when Chad rebuilt that. Bob, do you have info on your new pull rod? Well, that pull rod's got to actually have a little bit of design adjustment to it if you're running IMCA. Some of the parts on that pull bar don't meet the IMCA rule because magnet will not stick to them. So they're in the process of doing some adjustments. We had the new style pull bar in Jake McBurney's car this weekend. Doesn't look near as cool, but it seemed to work very well. What's your opinion on a zero rebound right front shock on dry slick racing surfaces? Depends on the driver. If your driver can really keep the car up on the bar, do a really good job of trail braking the car, in theory, you should have more traction. The problem is if you don't do everything correctly, it can very easily snap traction on that tire because there's nothing there really trying to hold it down and force it to get bite in the car. So, we've kind of run into the situation where the 0 point, which is the old hand dyno, we don't put as much of the 0 point, which is how many pounds it takes to move this thing apart at the start of the shock to help the traction off. But when it's got more speed, the 2-inch number is actually still holding it down, and that seems to work pretty decent. Justin wants to know, do you use NLG 1 or 2 grease for the pull bar?
I don't know what NLG 1 or 2 is, but any synthetic wheel bearing grease is fine.
Okay, we're coming up on our 4 minutes to go, guys, so we're going to take a couple questions here, and then we're going to have to call it a night. Don't forget, we will not be here next Monday night. We'll be back on October 7th. We'll get to hear about Chad's trip to Washington, D.C. and his adventure of getting to meet the President of the United States, Mr. Trump. Ronald, have you experienced a race car too tight to the point it feels like you pulled 2 plug wires off? Yeah, there's no doubt about that, man. And that's, and that is one of the things that we find 9 times out of 10. The old adage is, as a driver, okay, we're driving this thing down in the corner as hard as we can. We want to make sure your ultimate fear is if the right rear unhooks and this thing turns around in front of the field, and oh my God, how many guys are going to hit you? I seen a couple of them this weekend, and luckily nobody hit them. But anyway, the point being is it's very common, and especially with the sport mods, you don't have the horsepower that you have, and so you got to really run the car free. And what I tell people is you really got to run the car free in the back of the car to the point where you rely on your throttle to traction it up. So the car rolls in, you really have to have it roll through the middle easily. And guaranteed, if you get the car freed up and you worry about keeping the car underneath you when you're on the traction or on the throttle, you'll be surprised. The car will feel like you added 20 horsepower to it, because that's the big thing that hurts these cars is everybody still has, and I understand it. I mean, I raced back when the tires were somewhat square. And that was one of the biggest problems. The thing that, though, back then what we did, we just got more horsepower. I mean, it wasn't a big deal. Just go to the engine shop and buy more horsepower. Where with the crate motors, yeah, you can't buy more horsepower. In your opinion, the pull bar location as far as angle and location on the center line of the housing, and what effect does less angle do? Less angle makes the car freer through the corner. It'll still have good traction going down the straightaway, but you're going to find that I still go with the fact that even though it's a solid link, we still actually go 2 inches to 3 inches ahead of center line. And I still like to be in that 14, 15 degrees of angle is a pretty forgiving place. We've seen some guys run less angle and make it work. So it kind of just depends on what your situation is. If you're on a momentum racetrack, you could probably get a little bit less angle out of it. But the big thing would be is, just making sure you get the car freed up. On a stock car style, crate racing street stock, what's an acceptable amount of right rear travel? I'm traveling almost 4 inches most nights with a 250-pound spring. Well, it's very possible that, kind of depends on where your shocks are located. If they're more inboard, you're going to have a little bit of a problem. They're going to run more angle. If you're more outboard, they're going to run more. 4 inches is that's quite a bit. I usually like to see it not have more than 3. So that would lead me to believe that you're probably got a real soft left rear spring and a lot of load, and you're toting the left front more than likely, because that's probably what's causing that excessive travel in the right rear. Just a guess. All right, guys. Well, we appreciate once again. Remind you. Okay, one more question. We'll get to this one. What can I do to loosen up an A-mod in the center of the corner? Panhard bar is a good choice. You know, that's probably your best choice, is in the center of the corner, probably taking a little bit of angle out of the panhard bar, but I would raise it on the pinion. I think that would help free it up in the middle of the corner. All right, guys, we sure appreciate it. And once again, we'll see you guys October 7th on a Wednesday night. We're going to change things up a little bit. I know it's going to confuse everybody slightly, but we're going to do our best to keep it. We'll start reminding you about October 4th or 5th. Actually, maybe October 1st, so that you're all ready. And then the main event's going to be getting to hear about Chad's trip to the Washington, D.C. and the White House. It's going to be exciting. All right, guys. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good night.